Hey, Dr. Woodward. How are
Hey,
you doing today?
yeah, not too bad. So far so good.
All right, so I've heard you're into juggling. Could you tell me more about that?
Oh, great. Who told you about that? Certain students end up finding out that a past hobby of mine is juggling. And I say a past hobby, it's just because I don't have that much time to spend with it anymore. But it's a really cool hobby because you can do it anywhere. Uh, there's always sort of three roughly similarly weighted and shaped and sized things you can juggle, and people have been doing it since antiquity, right? Like there are these cool engravings of like ancient Egyptians juggling,
Uh-huh.
many thousand years BC, and uh, I got into it in a funny way. Where I did my undergraduate degree, there was a PE requirement. You had to do PE, and there was all kinds of different. You could do like cardio stuff or weightlifting or whatever, but I wasn't very athletically inclined, and I chose to do juggling every single time. And it was in Portland, Oregon, and there was a big juggling community there. Uh, and so they would open the doors of the gymnasium to the greater Portland juggling community, and they would come in and kind of the deal was they could use all the equipment and stuff provided they helped students with juggling. And I actually do have, if you're curious to see, I don't know, no one knows about these, but I have uh, my few balls here. I can show you basic things, right? Uh, and really, it's super cool because it's just like learning how to ride a bike. Once you've gotten down a certain pattern, you never forget it. And there's infinite variations you can do to juggling. And really, so I'm missing another part of the story. My statistics professor in undergrad was a juggler himself, and he would be at these juggling nights whenever I would go for the PE class, and I got to know him better through that, and so it was a really cool. But so there's a basic three-ball cascade that everyone learns, but then you can start. There are all kinds of little things you can do to. There's just so many. You can put all these different twists on it, right? Like so many different things you can do, and it's neat because you can always once you learn one of these little things, you don't forget it, and you can combine them with other things and make a routine, and it's just really I don't know. There's something about it that's really satisfying in a sort of not at all intellectual, but just very basic sort of human way.
Mm-hmm.
It's just fun, and it's fun to watch, and people are like, "Oh wow," because it looks so hard until you try it yourself, and really, like as soon as you learn it, it takes all the mystery away. It's kind of like magic tricks, right? As soon as you know how to do a magic trick, it's like, oh, okay, I see the point. As soon as you can follow one of those patterns, you know, it's
Yeah.
pretty straightforward.
So, what do you think is your funniest or craziest story as a teacher?
Let's see, funniest or craziest story as a teacher. So I've taught at a few different levels. And strangely, my high school teaching, I didn't really have that many funny or crazy things happen. When I first came to UT, I was a TA as a graduate student for a course in which the Heisman Trophy winner Ricky Williams, so like really famous UT football player from back in the like late '90s, he was actually back in the course because he had been drafted to the NFL right out of UT, and he didn't have time to finish his degree, so he came back to finish, and I was like the TA for the course that he was in. It was really crazy. Uh, Crazy things seem to happen all the time. Like I have a student this semester, and for his project, he emailed Mark Cuban, and Mark Cuban responded to his email. Mark Cuban, like I mean, crazy things seem to happen around here all the time. So I don't know. I've never had any sort of, you know, just horror story about a student who like threw a desk at me or so, the stuff you read in the news. I've never had anything that's like that happen. Uh, thank goodness, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess I can't really pinpoint a single thing. It seems like if you wait a few weeks, something crazy or interesting will happen as a teacher. Is this you mean you're interacting with a bunch of students and that it can't be helped?
Yeah, so if you weren't a professor, what do you think you'd be doing?
Huh. That's an interesting question. The reason I came to graduate school in the first place was I wanted to learn how to improve education, how to use all these existing technologies and develop new technologies in such a way that we can really just make education more efficient at every level, right? Like, I mean, if you reflect on your own education, especially like K-12, there's a lot of inefficiency there, right? Like you're kind of stuck in these classrooms and you're not always actively learning something, right? But now we have these computers and we can use technology to kind of individualize instruction for students, right? So that you're not sitting there bored at any point, right? Like the holy grail is to have, you know, like computer tutors for students where they can sort of learn at their own pace and everybody wins, right? So I would probably be working in educational technology in some capacity. I've always been really interested in, just learning and remembering things and like how can we make this process more efficient, right? Because I don't know, there's so many cool things going on right now with that, and I've never, I don't know, but who knows, right? Like I'm not someone who has always had a certain career path in mind. Like I think I could be happy doing lots of different things. I've you know held many odd jobs through the years. I've been an electrician. I've been you know, in high school I worked at a smoothie shop. I've been a library, a reference librarian's assistant. I've done all kinds of crazy stuff, right? Like everything's interesting, and when you're someone who is able to find satisfaction in just being curious about things, then you can probably find fulfillment in just about anything. So I don't know. I really don't know. Again, it's hard to give a straight answer. But yeah.
Who's your favorite musical artist at the moment?
It's a hard question. I've never been someone who is like a super fan of a specific group or artist and like follows them over the years really, you know, die hard. Like, if I had to choose, I would probably say this past year I've really been into Grimes, but I tend to like solo artists when they have their own vision and they do these sort of art pop concept albums. Like I'm really into like Kate Bush and Fiona Apple and these artists who just do these really cool, unique things that are all their own. You know, like it's really cool when an individual person gets to just, especially when they're just so creative, gets to have complete control over, you know, a work like an album or. So yeah, I guess I'd probably have to say Grimes, but it's a tough call. I don't just like, you know, solo artists. I like, I don't know, I guess if I had to pick a genre, it'd be like Canadian indie pop, power pop, I don't know, things like that. But yeah, probably Grimes right now. That's what I've been really into lately.
Okay. What book are you reading right now?
So it's strange. I usually read books in series, right? I've never been the kind of person to start multiple books and not finish them. I tend to sort of take things one at a time and, you know, and get through things. I don't abandon things, but because if I'm going to start, right, I've already done the research and it's like, this is going to be worth my time. Occasionally you'll know you have to abandon something if it just sucks, right? Or if you just can't get into it or it's not doing it for you. But right now I've got 2 books going. One's a nonfiction book, and I've been reading it for too long. I really need to finish it. It's a really cool book. It's by Deborah Mayo, and she's a philosopher of science at Virginia Tech, I think. And it's a stats book. It's called Statistical Inference as Severe Testing, how to get beyond the statistics wars, because there's traditionally been 2 camps in statistics, right? There's the frequentists who appeal to like long-run averages, and then there's the Bayesians who, you know, it's all about updating prior beliefs in light of new data. And her point is to try to resolve some of the disputes that have sort of been long-standing in the field with this idea about you only have evidence for a claim if that claim has survived a severe test or a bunch of false, like potentially falsifying tests, right? Like anyway, I don't want to get too much into it, but it's pretty cool. It's a neat perspective, and it kind of helps to give frequentists a better claim to the sort of ground that they've inherited, because everybody uses frequentist statistics, right? I mean, it's baked into like almost every field. I do have a fiction book going right now. It's an old book from like the 1850s. It's Charlotte Bronte. It's called Villette. I really love the Bronte sisters, the Bronte family. They're fascinating. But this book is funny. It's a book my mother lied about. She used to tell me the story, like she had to write a book report when she was in high school, and she completely made up the fact that she read this book. And like, this is before Spark Notes and stuff, right? So or whatever. And she was like, oh yeah, Villette, I never touched the book. I just completely made stuff up because I was, there was something, I can't remember what happened, but she did really well on it anyway, right? And she had never read it. It's a cool book. It's very introspective, just about relationships, and I don't know. It's cool. I'm almost done, but it's kind of a slog. I mean, not a slog, but I have some time on the bus. I've read the bus, and I like to do a little bit of fiction reading on my commute. So
as a stats professor, what's your favorite statistical test?
Ooh, statistical test. Oh, that's statistical test. I mean, it's not so much the tests themselves that interest me, right? It's like why they work. One of my favorite things to talk about in class is the central limit theorem, right? Because it's so fascinating that you have these outcomes of these random processes, right? Like you have a random variable and different realizations of these independent random variables you can add together, right? And the sum of those independent realizations follows a normal distribution. And it's just this really shocking thing. I actually when I first found out that I was going to be taking this job and teaching, the Fine Arts Library was rolling out those 3D printers, and I got curious and I went over there and started messing with it, and I ended up designing my own demonstration of central limit theorem, and it doesn't work very well. But this is actually, Francis Galton came up with the first one of these. It's called a quincunx, or a bean machine, or a Galton board. It's kind of like Plinko from The Price is Right. And what happens is I've got a bunch of grains of salt up here, and they get, gravity pulls them down, and they bounce off of these pegs, right? And each time they hit a peg, presumably they have, it's like a flipping a coin, right? They could go left or they could go right, and it's about a 50% chance that each thing happens. But you can see what the sum of all these little bitty, these random realizations of left or right produce. So when you flip it, you should get something down at the bottom that's pretty normal, right? All the salt falls and they hit all these things, and you end up getting this distribution that, if I had done a better job building this thing, would be normal-ish. And really, this is where the central limit theorem originally came from, right? This idea that you can use the normal distribution to approximate the binomial distribution. But yeah, it's just a fun little. It's super important because it allows us to take this idea of sampling distributions under some null hypothesis and use them to evaluate how likely or unlikely certain data is, right? Yeah.
Last question, what advice would you give to your teenage self?
Ooh, my teenage self. Advice. I'm not very good at giving advice because people are also different, right? There's so many different life courses and trajectories that it's really hard to have a one-size-fits-all kind of advice. Like, I've never been a advocate of self-help books and things where they have these quick fixes for. I mean, it's like, I don't know. I have a little sister, a younger sister, and she tends to worry about things more than I do, and so I often find myself in the position of having to give advice. But I don't enjoy doing it because her circumstances are different than mine and everyone else's, right? But I always tell her, just keep doing what you're interested in. No matter what you're doing, do a good job at it, but do what you're interested in. Don't waste your time on things that don't interest you. And eventually, right, instead of having this sort of artificial goal that you set up for yourself and then you just adhere to try to reach it for the sake of reaching a goal, instead of that, just keep doing what you're interested in.